right?
Is that Eric?
Yeah, that's Eric. He's been coming through like that on my screen for a while.
Oh. All right. Hey, welcome once again, Talkin' Fans Fight, to another Friday episode of the show. And today we are talking about the upcoming Olympics, featuring Christian from the Friday night panel. And what news do you bring us today, Christian?
Well, we've been talking, most of this week has been kind of taken up with whether or not we were going to have an Olympic Games, which kind of brought us away from what we were hoping to talk about a little earlier on, which was some of the economics of the games and how some of these athletes make their money. This game being a particularly challenging one just because of where everything's been shifted around. So one of the things that we were looking at was an example from the last couple of sets of games. So we were looking today at the Rio Games, and I found an article that came out just before the games in Rio, and it was by a company called Sports Management Hub, and they specialize in sports management degrees. Now, this was written a little bit about the economics, and it takes largely into account the U.S. system, but it kind of goes to show where some of this money is either both coming from and how they're spending it, at least in one of the more developed nations, Olympic systems, and in their development pools across a number of sports here. So I thought this was interesting and worth looking into. Starting next week, starting Monday, we're going to start looking a little less broadly at the games as a whole and start focusing, bringing it a little closer into our interest, obviously, which is boxing. But I thought we would close out this one here just to something we were going to talk about earlier in the week that we didn't really get a chance to. So I wanted to talk. Let's jump right in with that on how athletes make their money. Okay. Helps. There we go.
Please do, because I didn't think they did.
Well, they don't all. So we all know that famous and professional athletes can make a great deal of money.
Yes.
Sometimes even more one after they're retired. For example, Michael Jordan's obviously the big example. Over a course of 10 years, he made over $90 million. Which is more than all of the athletes at Sochi 2014 made combined, and more than every other professional athlete individually. That's everyone, of course, except for boxer Floyd Mayweather, who earned at least $80 million, possibly more, in just one fight, and that was the Canelo Alvarez fight in 2013. He also fought Robert the Ghost Guerrero in 2013, earning at least $32 million. And that was a guaranteed $32 million for that fight, and that was excluding pay-per-view fees. However, Olympic athletes are typically, nowhere near as fortunate. In fact, the IOC, International Olympic Committee, doesn't pay athletes a cent for their Olympic appearances. Athletes have to fund their own way, either from their own pockets or through other means. So we're going to look today a little bit at how some of those have done just that, and raised that money. Gold is always going to be the goal here, that gold medal. And there's reasons for that. So how are these guys funding their Olympic dreams? One of these ways is out of their own pocket. According to bankrate.com, the 5 richest American Olympians at the 2014 Olympics in Sochi, excluding professional athletes such as NHL hockey players who would have been there, you're looking at guys like Shaun White, who's a snowboarder, who brought in $20 million from various endorsements and his majority share of the air and style competitive snowboard event. Alpine skier Bodie Miller brought home $8 million in endorsement deals. Alpine skier Ted Lighty, $2 million in endorsement deals and prize money from competitions, and founding his own optics company for ski goggles, sunglasses, and helmets called Shred Optics. Snowboarder Hannah Tedder made $1 million from sponsors and founding ownership in an underwear line called Sweet Cheeks. And finally, snowboarder Lindsay Jacobellis made $1 million in endorsement deals and sponsorships. So, there's a bit of a trend, at least in on the snowboarding and skiing side of things. But keep in mind, we're talking Winter Olympics at that point in time. This also doesn't mean that these athletes, even though they're making that doesn't mean that they actually paid their own way to the Olympics either. So how other Olympic hopefuls are making a living, who aren't necessarily as entrepreneurial or don't have those opportunities. First, I think it is important to understand a little bit about the history of lifting the amateur status, I think, for Olympic events. In 1971, the IOC removed the requirement of being an amateur. That is, athletes could receive compensation, sponsorship from national and sporting organizations, as well as private business for the first time. Now, this held the Americans at the time in a bit of a disadvantage, as they were competing against athletes from certain countries who were being sponsored by their own governments, most notably, of course, being the Soviets at the time. And this was because under the American model, Olympic athletes still had to be amateurs with no payment whatsoever until 1978, whereupon the Ted Stevens Olympic Amateur Sports Act was adopted. At that point, U.S. Olympic athletes could then get various funding sources, such as financial awards, sponsorships, or out-and-out payment. In 1986, professional athletes could compete in every Olympic sport. And by 1998, the Ted Stevens Act was expanded to include Paralympics as well. Since then, athletes sometimes will have corporate sponsors, which is going to be different than an endorsement deal. Okay, so U.S. corporations might spend millions a year sponsoring an entire team instead of one individual athlete. As a result, team members are going to end up wearing logos on their clothing, accessories, and gear. For example, American Olympian swimmer Ryan Lochte was estimated at getting somewhere about $2.3 million from multiple sponsors in 2012, and that was dependent on his medal performance in London. He brought home 2 gold, 2 silver, and a bronze that year. There's also some money from the U.S. Olympic Committee and other sources, of course. This is interesting. The U.S. Olympic Committee made over $625 million annually between 2005 and 2008 from just the U.S. only broadcast rights. Additional $120 million annually coming from U.S. corporate sponsors. Now, out of that money, the U.S. Olympic Committee pays athletes medal bonuses. Now, this is where gold's the idea here: $25,000 for a gold medal, $15,000 for a silver, and $10,000 for a bronze. Those rates have stayed the same for some time now, so they are kind of devaluing a little bit because of inflation, but still there. Special funds such as the Living the Dream Medal Fund were set up for Olympic wrestlers, with prizes of $250,000 for a gold medal, $50,000 for silver, and $25,000 for a bronze. USA Swimming pulls in over $100 million annually from registration fees from about 300,000 members. Members who are on the national team and that rank 16th or higher are paid $3,000 a month. In 2011, USA Swimming paid out $7 million to team swimmers. And they also do pay stipends to college athletes as well. But given that there's a limited number of medals at any Olympics, winter or summer, and many thousands more athletes, not everyone, of course, is going to be fortunate enough to get one of these sponsorships or endorsements or medal bonuses for that matter. And they may not necessarily have the funds or be entrepreneurial like some of our earlier people we mentioned. In some countries, Olympic hopefuls are going to be sponsored by their governments or special programs, but in the U.S., they're not. They're still getting funded by friends and family, sponsored by local businesses, funding at the community level, which right down to church bake sales, that sort of thing. Some larger American companies are partnering with the U.S. Olympic Committee and participate in what's known as the long-term, the OJOP, the Olympic Job Opportunities Program, where they'll pay full-time salaries and benefits to athletes, but allow them to work part-time to accommodate their training. But athletes do have to maintain a certain ranking within their sport in order to be accepted to and to stay on a program like that. As well, the U.S. Olympic Committee is providing funds to the national governing bodies for each sport. But typically, this is just going to be to cover the costs of technology as well as shipping equipment overseas, equipment and athletes overseas, I should say. There are also various foundations backed by corporations that give out grants to athletes, albeit not just Olympic hopefuls. There's the Ross Powers Foundation, for example, that has given out over 266 grants and valued at just under $500,000 so far with 129 recipients since 2002. A dozen of these have been Olympic competitors. There's also opportunities in the other world sporting competitions that have prize money attached to it, although this is going to involve you being in the top 10 in any given sport. For example, Jack Wickens of Track and Field US Foundation Board of Directors evaluated the income available in that discipline and found the following: that income is really going to be dependent on what you're competing in. Sprints and marathons are going to make you the most money, for example. And about 20% of the top 10 American track and field athletes, only 20% make over $50,000 annually. Less than $15,000 annually is about what 50% of track and field athletes who rank in the top 10 in the US can expect. And this is from all sources: sponsorships, grant money, prizes, anything. Anything below the top 10, you're not bringing home any income in the US from your sporting activity. Top 10 runners in the world in this sport can earn over $100,000 a year annually, while the top two guys are doing considerably better than that. Runners in the 11 to 25 positions around the world, can expect anywhere from $10,000 to $60,000 annually. That's either doing moderately well in a given year or poorly, kind of thing. All other runners below that ranking 25 globally tend to have day jobs. Top triathletes can make anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, with a couple notable examples making over $1 million, i.e. Chrissy Wellington and Chris McCormack. But the rest might top out at $20,000 a year. And those who don't get sponsored or get hired under the OJOP, that job program, or compete in other athletic events, typically have to hold down other jobs that give them some flexibility to train, including, but, not limited to being, physical type of work, where they're going to be doing things like, coaching, fitness instructors, golf club staff. Though some end up doing odd jobs at seasonal events. For example, the snowboarder Tyler Jewell, he was selling sausages at a state fair in New Mexico, among other gigs. And, he pointed out at the time, it's difficult to have a full-time job when training sessions are running 5 hours a day, every day. So there's I'll give you an idea. Some American athletes have been doing, or who are Olympians, American Olympians are doing to keep a roof over their head. Gwen Jorgensen, who's a triathlete, is an accountant by day, works for Ernst & Young. Dennis Bauhauser, pentathlon, is an Army specialist. Jared Freyer, Olympic wrestler, is a coach and a teacher on top of his own training schedule. Lance Brooks, discus thrower, he's a construction worker. Jasmine Philanter, bobsled driver, is a dog walker, works odd jobs in the food industry, and is also getting financial aid through her community and sponsorship from Liberty Mutual Insurance. So she's got to pull from a lot of different places. We've health researchers, we've got motion graphics designers, plumbers, so people getting into really every line of work on top of these 5-6 hour training schedules every single day. So these people they're giving up their entire lives, in essence, to try to put together this money in order to get themselves to an Olympic Games. A waiter, Tyler Fletcher, who's a Nordic combined skier, says it costs him $20,000 a year just to compete in his sport. Still others have part-time jobs or, live with their parents or other family to cut down on costs. Some athletes have university scholarships, but these aren't going to cover the costs of making it to something like the Olympics. Unfortunately, the cost of being an athlete aspiring to be in the Olympics is also going to include, not just yourself, but coaches, trainers, medical expenses, equipment, travel, not to mention just, your day-to-day expenses, keeping a roof over your head. In the past, athletes have subsisted on food stamps and sharing rent with roommates. A great example of that would be Steve Prefontaine, who was a runner in the 70s, very famous. Before the 1972 Olympics, before the rules for athletes changed, with athletes not accepting endorsements, others were holding fundraisers, auctioning themselves off as celebrity dates or sometimes for sponsorships. Other athletes were a little bit more extreme. A Tongan luger by the name of Fuhea Semi, again, I apologize on the name, changed his name to Bruno Bananai which was also the name of the German underwear and swimsuit company that now sponsors him. So some of these athletes are going to extreme, kind of extreme measures to find a way to keep themselves in their sport. So the thing that really comes to my mind and makes me start to question is how are these funds being allocated when we look at $630 million annually, $120 million annually from sponsorship deals that are coming in. How do you feel, Graham, about the disbursement of those funds when we're looking at, $25,000 for a gold medal, but if you're in Pool B, for example, you're not the top 10, nothing. You're not getting anything. No sponsorship, no travel. How do you feel about the distribution of wealth on this one?
That is a controversial subject.
It's a bit all over the map. I know the numbers I just threw at you there, but
I'll just put it into a bit of a personal perspective. After the Sydney Games, I think that was 2000.
That was 2000. Yeah.
I happen to know the Canadian beach volleyballers who got the bronze medal. I think it was Heath and Child. Anyway, as a friend and as a marketing guy, I was raising money for them through sponsorships. And when I first met them, even though they were bronze medalists and competing around the world at that time, and winning lots of competitions as well, their only sponsor was actually Coffee Time, a coffee shop, a national coffee shop. Okay. So I said, oh, well, that's a good start. I mean, you guys must be making a lot of money from that sponsorship. They go, yeah, we get free coffee. And they went on to tell me how much money, for example, the Americans were making at the exact same level of competition. But here were our guys getting free coffee, and the Americans literally driving up in limos. But anyway, it's a tough one because the economics of each country will dictate, driven, I think, by corporate policies.
Well, that bronze would have been worth $10,000 if they were American. Just for that podium placement would have been a $10,000 bonus if they had been Americans.
Correct. I'm not at all sure how much, if any, the Canadian Olympic Organization gave them. based on our conversations, I don't think they got anything. Anyway, sorry to laugh. It wasn't funny. Well, it was funny. It is funny. But I mean, there's different levels of why athletes do what they do, and I don't think money is the driving force for many of them, or else otherwise Child and Heath would not have competed in that Olympics at all if it wasn't fun. I mean, it was fun for them, and they had a lot of fun playing not only beach volleyball but also traveling the world, and being reimbursed for those travel expenses without a doubt, but not being paid personally. I think they had a small amount of money they got as a monthly stipend for being as part of the Olympic team, but not for winning.
Well, that would only be because they're at the very top of their game too, and right near the top of their sport. As you know, as we saw a little earlier there, you've got to be in that top 10 and top 20 globally to kind of see anything from any of these people here. But it also shows a bit of a lesson in economic advantage as well. Where if you are in that top 16, for example, in your sport, and you're seeing even $3,000 a month, that's paying your rent. That's making sure you're fed. That's giving you the time to not have to go to work. That's giving you the time to devote yourself, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally to the training regimen. Because as much of a toll as it is on your body, it's also a massive toll emotionally and mentally for these athletes too. Training, getting closer to the Olympic Games, not just the stress of whether or not it's going to happen and what that actual competition is going to look like, but just the hours you have to keep, the lack of time you get to spend with friends and family, and just the personal sacrifices you have to make to be at the top of your level, the top of your game. The mental and emotional stress is through the roof as well. So having a stipend where you can actually stay home and and devote yourself entirely to that training process, or at least most of your time to that training process, would be a huge benefit compared to these people who are. And I mentioned the one person there who's working 3 different jobs and still has sponsorship.
It's a great discussion because how do you define amateur when there are
when you're being paid?
Factors, right. When there are these other factors, they include compensation and reimbursement and incentives. But going back to an earlier point that you'd made at the beginning of this episode, you had mentioned how much money professionals were paid by comparison. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'm pretty sure the highest paid professional athletes, though, are the European footballers. I'm pretty sure Messi and those fellas are in the 100 million a year range. And I'd be curious to know how much your boy Brady makes, actually.
Okay, well, first off, he's in Tampa now, and I don't want to talk about that.
I know.
He's not my boy anymore. He left.
I'm just kind of curious how much top-ranked U.S. quarterbacks make. I'm pretty sure they would be well in excess of whatever you quoted Michael Jordan was making over that 10-year period. Was it 100 million? So that's 10 million a year?
That was just on endorsement deals.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. That figure for him was strictly endorsement deals.
Right. Yeah, it's funny.
Just for you, Brady though, he's on a 2-year contract right now worth $50 million
a year.
No, the contract over 2 years is $50 million.
Not bad. I'm sure he's going to get paid a lot more when they win the Super Bowl.
Not bad for a guy in his 40s, who most guys don't make it to his age in that game.
It's true enough, and but he's truly a great player. Anyway,
and he started off. You never know where you're going to end up. That's another thing these amateur sports has taught us. You never know where you're going to end up. A fun Brady fact you may not know: did you know that in 1995 he was drafted 507th overall by the Montreal Expos?
Wow, that is a fun fact.
Before he was throwing footballs, he was throwing baseballs, and Tom Brady was actually drafted in the '95 season by the Montreal Expos.
That's amazing. Good one.
Yep.
I know you have to run, so we'll wrap it up. Thanks very much for making that presentation on the funding with respect to the Olympics and what these athletes are going through in order to get to where they are. That's great stuff. And I look forward to
chat a little later on this evening. Yeah.
Oh, yes, we're on tonight.
It is Friday. It is Friday. So I will see you. I'll see you again at 7 tonight.
Awesome. We'll see you then. And I do believe we have Zahir Rahim joining us tonight, actually.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So it's going to be fun.
We'll have some questions for him.
I'll see you then.
Talk soon.
Like, share, subscribe.